olóyè Sunday lẹ́ni tí mo mọ̀ tó jẹ́ àjìjàngbara Yorùbá tí ó fẹ́rẹ̀ jẹ́ tó ń wí fúnjọba pẹ̀lẹ́yàmẹ̀yà tó gẹ́ ìjẹ́ tí ẹ jẹ́ tẹ̀tẹ̀ ní ìjẹkújẹ ẹ má jẹ dákúrò ìbò ṣeré jẹ Yorùbá ronú ẹ má fi fẹ́ kún pàjẹ́ ESS dẹ́yìn lẹ́yìn ìbò jẹ́jẹ́ ẹ wọnú gbólọ kẹ lọmọ dàrán fẹ́ kún pàjẹ́ ìjọba Nàìjà ẹ má fọwọ́ kan lórí kì í sọ ọ̀daràn kírímínà àjìjàgbara ṣóhun tó ń jà fẹ́tọ̀ ọmọ Yorùbá ẹ mọ̀ wọ́n dáràn ẹ̀rù wọn Ìgbòho ṣàlẹ̀ dùn wọn ọmọ Yorùbá ẹ̀rù wọn àsìkò ti tó káyé ẹ mẹ́jọ fi wá ṣẹ̀rù mọ́ ẹ ti rí lẹ́yìn Ìgbòho kápá ọ̀tá ó má ṣe ká.
Mo mà kó nílé mo kálejò, mo kí lọ́kùnrin bẹ́ẹ̀ ni mo kí obìnrin, mo kí ládéládé nílẹ̀ Yorùbá, mo kí lóyèlóyè, mo kí ọ̀tọ̀kùlúùlù, mo súnmọ́ba níwọ̀n ẹgbẹ̀je, mo jìnnà sọ́ba níwọ̀n ẹgbẹ̀fà torí pé àrọ́bàfin lọ́ba ń pa. Èmi ò sí nínú àwọn abáwọn rọ́bàfin o, mo júbà gbogbo ọba aládé ilẹ̀ Yorùbá káàkiri. Mo wá kí gbogbo òjòyè tó wà nílẹ̀ Yorùbá. Bákan náà ni pé gbogbo ẹ̀yin tí ẹ jẹ́ lólùfẹ́ ètò gbàgede ìmọ̀ káàkiri gbogbo ilẹ̀ Nàìjíríà àti káàkiri àgbáyé tó kù, gbogbo yín náà ni mo kí o. Mo ṣe ládùúrà pé gbogbo ẹ̀yin ọmọ Nàìjíríà, gbogbo ẹ̀yin ọmọ Yorùbá tẹ́ ẹ wà káàkiri ìlú àgbáyé tó kù yàtọ̀ fún Nàìjíríà, ẹ̀yin tẹ́ wà l'Amẹ́ríkà, tẹ́ wà l'Áfíríkà, tẹ́ wà ní Asia, tẹ́ wà ní Europe, ní agbára Olódùmarè ọba òkè ẹ mà kúkú kó èrò oko délé. Àṣeyẹ báyìí lálákànṣepọ̀, ẹ ò ní gbé sájò, ẹ ò ní kú sọ́nà bí èéfín. Ẹ káàbọ̀ lẹ́ẹ̀kan sí sórí ètò wa, ètò kan, ètò bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀, òun náà ló mà tó dòde. Ẹ bá mi ké sí alára o, kẹ ké sí ajérò, kẹ kí ọ̀wàgún ọ̀rọ̀ àga, kẹ kí sí ọ̀rọ̀gún tilé ìlà wípé ètò bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ mà tún ti dòde lónìí. Ẹ bá mi wá nǹkan fìdílé o, tàbí kí ẹ fìdílé nǹkan, kí ẹ jẹ́ kájọ papọ̀ kájọ túkọ̀ tòní. Mo sì ṣe ládùúrà pé etí tẹ fi ń gbọ́ mi ò ní di, ojú tẹ sì fi ń wò mí, ojú náà ò ní fọ́ lágbára Olódùmarè ọba òkè. Kí n tó máa bẹ́tò tòní lọ, ẹ jẹ́ kí n fàsìkò yìí rọ̀ yín o wípé ẹ wo ibi tí wọ́n kọ subscribe sí fún ẹ̀yin tẹ́ ẹ̀ bá tí ì tẹ̀ láti jọta tí ń bẹ̀ yín yìí. Ẹ wo ibi tí wọ́n kọ subscribe sí kẹ́ bá wa tẹ̀ ẹ́ kẹ́yìn náà jẹ́ àjọ kọ́mọlùbọ́ kájọ darapọ̀ nínú ètò yìí. Ẹ sì wo ibi tí wọ́n fi àmì aago sí tán pè ní notification bell. Ìgbàkígbà tí n bá ti ṣe fídíò jáde kò nídìí pé kẹ́ ẹ béèrè, wọ́n wá fún yín ní notification pé bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ tún ti dé ta o. Ẹ̀yin tí ẹ wá wà lórí ṣánẹ́ẹ̀lì gbàgede ìmọ̀, gbogbo ìgbà náà ni mo wá pè yín kúrò ní ṣánẹ́ẹ̀lì yìí. A ò ṣe fídíò sí ṣánẹ́ẹ̀lì yìí mọ́. Mo rọ̀ yín tẹ́ bá sì nífẹ̀ẹ́ láti máa wò mí beyond August tá wà yìí, torí pé lágbára Ọlọ́run Elédùà lẹ́yìn August yìí o, a máa delete channel gbàgede ìmọ̀. Ẹ wo abẹ́ fídíò tẹ́ ń wò lọ́wọ́lọ́wọ́ yìí, ẹ rí líǹkì gbàgede ìmọ̀, bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ channel, ẹ rí líǹkì ẹ̀ nínú fídíò tẹ́ ń wò yìí. Ẹ̀yin ẹ ṣáà wo ìsàlẹ̀ ibi tá a kọ title sí, ẹ máa rí mbẹ̀, ẹ rí líǹkì fídíò, ẹ ṣáà kílíkì lórí líǹkì yẹn, yóò gbé yín lọ sínú channel tuntun tá a ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ṣe. Ẹ ṣeun, mo dúpẹ́ o. Ẹ bá mi dúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ special Monze tí ó ń jíṣẹ́ mi gbé ní gbogbo ìgbà. Ṣé nígbà míì ọjọ́ gbogbo ni tó lè, ọjọ́ kan báyìí ni tó níhun. Mo promise ẹ special Monze pé láìpẹ́ yìí o fẹ́ bá ìbànújẹ́ pàdé náà nínú gbogbo iṣẹ́ mi tó ń gbé. Fọkànbalẹ̀, tẹ́ bá ṣáà ti tún wo fídíò yìí nínú special Monze channel lórí Facebook ẹ ṣá máa rìpọ́ọ̀tù ẹ̀. Ìtú tó tí mo máa pa wà nínú mi gbogbo tó ń rò ní wípé látijọ́ tí mo ti ń sọ kùkú sí tí mo ṣe fóun mi ò rírí kí èmi ṣe iṣẹ́ kẹ́nìkan wá gbéṣẹ́ náà kó máa fi pawó n tún fẹ́ kó ṣẹlẹ̀ sóhun láìpẹ́ yìí ó ṣẹlẹ̀ sí. tó ẹ jẹ́ ká gbé agbada kaná o ká gbé ọkọ̀ sí orí ọgbà mi ẹ jẹ́ ká jọ máa bá ètò tòní lọ. lákọ̀ọ́kọ́ náà Olódùmarè mà ṣàánú wa o lórí ọ̀rọ̀ ìlú Nàìjíríà tí a wà yìí. Ǹjẹ́ jẹ́ mọ̀ pé bí wọ́n ti ń gbìyànjú láti pé kí èkúrú tán láwo ó níjọba tó wà lóde má tún gbọ́nwọ́ rẹ̀ sáwo. À ń jèkúrú kó tán láwo ìjọba ń gbọ́nwọ́ rẹ̀ sáwo ni o. Kí ni tó ṣẹlẹ̀? Èyí tó ṣẹlẹ̀ ni pé àwọn gómìnà tá a bá rántí ni wọ́n ṣe mítìnì wípé ohun tó ń jẹ́ open grazing kó dohun gbàgbé ní pàápàá jùlọ ní gbogbo south. Àmọ́ ohun tó yani lẹ́nu ni wípé ṣé Yorùbá ní báyìí ni wọ́n ṣe nǹkan mi wọ́n ní kò yí padà rí. Gómìnà ìjọba tó wà lóde mà sọ pé báyìí làwọn fẹ́ ṣe nǹkan àwọn kò yí padà. Ṣé kàkà kó rọ̀ lára ọmọ ìyá àjẹ́ ó tún fi gbogbo ọmọ rẹ̀ bóbìnrin sí ni. Ìjọba tó wà lóde mà kọ́ o wọ́n ní gbogbo ohun tó ní kálukú sọ lọ́tún ló sì pé n tí ń jẹ́ ká máa fẹ́ràn dẹ̀ kiri wọ́n ní kó stop ṣùgbọ́n ìjọba ní kò jọ o. Kódà àsìkò yìí gan ni wọ́n ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ wá lọ bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní audit gbogbo open grazing gbogbo àwọn grazing line tí wọ́n ti ṣe sáwọn ìlú tẹ́lẹ̀ ìlú bí ìlú 26 níjọba wa tún wá ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ sọ pé lọ́ṣẹ̀ inaugurate committee tọ́ṣẹ̀ láwọn ṣẹ̀ fẹ́ ṣí open grazing padà ìmáa fi ẹran jẹ kiri rúgà wọ́n wá ló di dandan o pé àfi káwọn dálẹ̀. Nísìnyí àìmọye committee ni wọ́n ti inaugurate tí wọ́n sọ pé káwọn èèyàn wọn kí wọ́n máa lọ yẹ àwọn state kọ̀ọ̀kan wò èwo làwọn èèyàn ti gbalẹ̀ yẹn ibi tí wọ́n ti ń foko jẹ tẹ́lẹ̀ èwo náà ti gbà nú ẹ̀ káàkiri mo wá fọwọ́ lẹ́rán mo wò pé kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀. Àwọn governors àwọn state yìí ṣe meeting wípé àwọn ò fẹ́ open grazing mọ́. Àsìkò yìí níjọba àpapọ̀ látàbújá ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ wá gbé committee dìde wípé káwọn lọ máa yẹ àwọn grazing line tí wọ́n ti ṣe látọdún gbọ́n tó ti kú tí wọn ò ṣerú ẹ̀ mọ́. Àwọn èèyàn ní ranching làwọn fẹ́ ṣe ìyẹn ni pé ìmá kó màálù sí ojú kan kí wọ́n máa sìn. Ìjọba ní rárá o àfikún máa dẹran jẹ gan-an. Ìmádẹ fẹ́ràn jẹ yìí gangan ló ń fa pípa tí Fúlàní ń pa àwọn èèyàn. Oríṣiríṣi àwọn ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n ọ̀tọ̀kùlú ni wọ́n ti sọ̀rọ̀ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ yìí. Fídíò kìíní fídíò kejì tí mo fẹ́ gbé wá yìí Arise TV tí mo nífẹ̀ẹ́ sí kí n máa gbọ́rọ̀ wọn ni wọ́n gbé àwọn àlejò yìí wá inú mi sì dùn sí tó ní kálukú sọ ń bẹ̀. Mo ń bọ̀ ná ẹ jẹ́ á lọ wo àwọn fídíòs ẹ jẹ́ á gbọ́ nǹkan tí àwọn ọ̀tọ̀kùlú tí wọ́n sọ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ pé gọ́fìmẹ̀ntì láàrin ẹ̀ náà ẹ gbọ́n tí gọ́fìnà Tom sọ as usual. Gọ́fìnà Tom àtàkì gọ́fìmẹ̀ntì pé kò jọ o nínú tòun o open grazing ò ní ṣẹlẹ̀ ní Benue. Mo ń padà bọ̀ ọ̀rọ̀ ṣe sọ fìtílà fìtínà bá kú.
President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the review of 368 grazing sites across 25 states in the country. This is to determine the levels of encroachment. The directive followed the recommendations of a committee chaired by the Chief of Staff to the President, Professor Ibrahim Gambari. The committee is to collate from states and confirm the status of all grazing reserves, assess the percentage of available land and those with existing encroachment complications for case-by-case resolution. It will also make recommendations for gazetting of ungazetted grazing reserves and create a database of national cattle herders and ensure that grazing reserves are well communicated to all stakeholders. President Buhari wants the assignment undertaken with dispatch to bring more understanding on the grazing reserves and implementation. Members of the committee include Kebbi State Governor and Vice Chairman, National Food Security Council, Abubakar Bagudu, Ebonyi State Governor and Chairman of National Economic Council, Subcommittee for National Livestock Transformation Plan, David Umahi, Minister of Water Resources, Suleiman Adamu, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Sabo Nanono, Minister of Environment, Muhammad Abubakar, and Deputy Chief of Staff, Ade Ipaye. This development comes amid controversy over the grazing reserves as southern governors enact anti-open grazing legislations. For more, we're being joined by a lawyer and public affairs analyst, Libros Oshoma, as well as the Chief Press Secretary to the Benue State Governor, Teive Akaze. Good to have you both, gentlemen, on Newsday.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having us.
That's great. Let's start with you, Libros. We recently were applauding and lauding the Petroleum Industry Act, and now we're faced with this. We're told that we're going to be seeing a review of grazing reserves or grazing routes in 25 states. Is it a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or is it 1 step forward and 2 steps back, or is this merely a pothole that can be circumvented?
Thank you for your question. I think it's a pothole that should be filled, not even circumvented. We're talking about grazing routes and grazing reserve of a 1965 Gazette. And one would wonder that as at 1965, when that Gazette was enacted, or the document was gazetted, the Land Use Act was not in place as at that time. And then secondly, if you look at the proviso to the said Gazette, it did recommend in that same Gazette that the ultimate aim of the Gazette was to encourage ranching at that time, which was fast becoming the modern way of rearing cattle. And I do not think that, considering the provisions of our Constitution, which has also put the issue of ranching and cattle rearing squarely under the residual legislative list and not even concurrent, not talk of exclusive legislative list, it should be the problem or the prerogative of Mr. President now to begin to discuss grazing reserve and grazing route. Already, even before that pronouncement, some northern states like Bauchi State, Kebbi State, Borno State, excluding Niger State, because Niger State has insisted that ranching was better and they were going to encourage ranching. Even in Ekiti recently, the governor acquired a massive land, imported cows for ranching. And so I do not really think that this is the time for us to be waking up a horse that should have been dead long ago.
All right, thank you for that. Teive Akaze, thank you for joining us. So, quick question for you. We know that Benue State has an anti-open grazing law. How will this affect? Which one supersedes the other one? How will these gazetting routes, how will it play out?
Thank you for this question. And let me begin by saying that we are deeply shocked and disappointed in the federal government. We expected that if you look at the array of personalities on that committee, you would expect that they will live up the true meaning and perception of an expectation of Nigerians as patrons that they are expected to be. Now, they should have advised Mr. President that grazing reserves or cattle routes, as the case may be, are no longer fashionable, and that the entire country, including his home state, Katsina, has come to agree that grazing reserves or cattle routes are no longer feasible. And Nigeria has left that stage and is on to the stage of ranching now. For us in Benue, we have since 2017, we have left the idea of open grazing. And that's why we hope that the 25 states, remember they didn't disclose the names of those states. We want to believe that Benue is not among the 25 states, because if they make the mistake of including Benue on that list, no one will come to this state to map and mark any land for cattle rearing, for grazing reserves. We do not have land for grazing reserves. We have land for ranching, and people, Benue people who own livestock, have been ranching them according to the Open Grazing Prohibition and Ranches Establishment Law of Benue State 2017. So we wish to put it on record. We wish to let the federal government know that if they made an error of including Benue on the list of states where lands will be mapped for cattle, for open grazing, whatever name they call it, whether it's grazing reserves
I need to bring
or whatever.
I need to bring in Libra Soshoma at this point so that we can get a broader perspective as well. Libra Soshoma, like Teve mentioned, we have quite an array of people on this committee, so people can't say there wasn't an effort to carry people along. So I want you to try and help us understand what could be the rationale behind this move, especially as we know the president is keen to leave behind a legacy of success. And then could you try and anticipate what could come about? Because it looks like it's a trigger for a face-off if this grazing reserves were to be put forward as valid.
Yeah, I think the reason for this is because we operate a system of government where the president or the leaders can do no wrong. You find people who would, in private, condemn this act and then come out publicly to eulogize it simply because the president had said so. One would have expected that the Attorney General of the Federation, being a seasoned lawyer and a senior advocate of Nigeria, would have looked at the laws, especially the Grazing Gazette that I cited, and then the proviso to that Gazette vis-a-vis the provisions of the Constitution and the Land Use Act. And so, I do not, now it is very difficult for you to say because you have this array of people that they will advise the president in tandem with the provisions of the law. Because in this same country, we've seen a president saying, look, I appoint you as advisors, but it is left for me to accept your advice or not. So you ask yourself the first question, has grazing reserve and route, been a panacea to the incessant problems of headers, farmers' crisis, and then also vis-a-vis the banditry up north? As I speak now, the governor of Katsina State had advised these people to take up arms to protect themselves. In Kano State, where the state government also had taken steps to gazetting grazing routes, the governor came out publicly to condemn also the fact that grazing routes are no longer fashionable. In Niger State, the government was very categorical because they are one of the hardest hit states in as far as this clash is concerned. And they came out publicly to say, no, they are encouraging ranching. So one would have expected, like I said, that this should have been, because especially having not solved the problem, the consistent problem. Look at the recent crisis in Jos. Despite the fact also that some part of Jos, they have been earmarked for grazing route. But lastly, on this note, I would want to say that if you're discussing routes that had been reserved since 1965, and then you place it vis-a-vis with the modernity and development that had happened from 1965 till date, a situation where, take Igbogon for example, where houses and palaces have been built on routes that ordinarily were earmarked, because that was the only state, if you look at the Gazette, that's the only state in the southern part of Nigeria that the grazing routes were listed. But then a high court judge in the southern Nigeria, Justice Thompson, did rule that those routes were illegal. And against all of those backdrops.
I have to stop you there. Let's bring in Teve. Okay. Hawa.
All right, Teve, so earlier on you were discussing how Benue State, if obviously they're against these anti-grazing laws, and if it did come down to it, there would be some sort of a clash. I'm wondering, of the other 25 states, have you speculated which other states in the South might be included in this gazetting law?
How will I know when the federal government has chosen not to disclose the names of the states? We are only speculating, and that's why I had to issue that caution, that if Benue is included in that list, if Benue is on that list, then they should know that they are whipping a dead horse. It will not take place. Grazing reserves will not take place in Benue State. We will resist it. The people will rise against it because they have unanimously given their backing Governor Samuel Otom to implement, to enforce the ban on open grazing. But by the way, why is the presidency considering open grazing reserves as the only project they have for Nigeria? Is that the only thing they can do for this country? Mr. President was elected popularly in 2015 and in 2019 by the same Nigerians who are in IDP camps in Benue. Thousands of these people are suffering in the camps. He has not done anything to alleviate the suffering of the people. All that we hear every day is that Mr. President has directed that grazing reserves should be established in all the states. What kind of thing is this? Was this man elected to enforce, to impose policies on Nigerians? This is democracy, for goodness sake.
On that note, I can see you're very passionate about it, but we're going to have to leave that conversation there and maybe take it up in the days to come. Thank you very much, Teve Akaze, Chief Press Secretary to the Governor of Benue State, and Libra Soshoma, lawyer and public affairs analyst. Thank you for joining us.
State Governor Samuel Otom's reaction to President Muhammadu Buhari's order to review 368 grazing sites across 25 states in the country. The governor says it is clear that the president is planning to plunge the country into crisis. He also accuses the present administration of placing priority on the welfare of cattle over that of the people he says voted for the president. He believes the president is turning Nigeria into what he describes as a cow republic. The governor is accusing the president of turning a blind eye to the unimaginable levels of encroachment on lands belonging to Nigerians. However, the president pointed out that the review is to determine the levels of encroachment.
All right, for a close look, like we told you in the course of the bulletin, we are now joined by senior advocate Ebun Olu Adeborowa from our Lagos studios to speak on this development. Ebu, glad to have you join us on News Night.
Good evening.
Nigeria has 415 grazing reserves in 21 states, just 2 in the south, Oyo and Ogun, and about 140 grazing routes with 138 in the north. Now, the president approved a review of 368 grazing sites across 25 states. What do you make of all this?
I believe that Nigeria is a country governed by laws, and since we elected to practice democracy, rule of law, and due process, we have compartments and statutory responsibilities that the Constitution has assigned to the various levels of governance. We run a federation, which includes the federal government, the state government, and the local government. In our law, the administration of land is exclusive to the states. And I believe that in our development as a nation, as of 2021, the idea of grazing routes in any part of this country is totally outdated, illegal, and cannot be supported by any law in any manner whatsoever. Now, I believe that in the period when we were under colonial rule or in the time past, actually it may have been fashionable to have some designated land or routes as grazing for cattle. But in 1978, Nigeria adopted a new system of land administration by enacting what we call the Land Use Act. That Land Use Act in Section 1 has given the administration and control of land to the people of Nigeria in the various states. So by law, land is vested in the governor of the states on behalf of the people of Nigeria. So to that extent, the president has no statutory role to play in the administration of land. He cannot give any directive. He cannot set up any committee. He cannot, by law, do any action that would seem to interfere with the powers of the governors in the states, in the urban areas, and then the local government in the local areas. And now the Land Use Act is part of the Constitution since 1999. So if you want to amend the Land Use Act, you have to first also remove it from the Constitution to be able to amend it. So I think there is no need for this controversy.
Okay. So effectively, Mr. Ebun-Adegboruwa, are you saying that the president is inventing an unnecessary conflict with the state government, who are the owners of the land and territories? And does this come to you as a surprise, considering that the president is presumed to be relying on the counsel of the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, who is a senior lawyer, a very senior lawyer?
I don't think it's to say, we don't know, I cannot speculate on the basis for which the president has made the declaration or upon which he is acting. And so, but whosoever is responsible for offering such opinion, it will be good for such person to consult the Land Use Act, Section 1, which grants law to the people, Section 34, which even says that without even applying for certificate of occupancy, you are presumed to have a statutory right of occupancy over land constituted in you. So to that extent, I believe that what is to be done is what the president did in July this very year, when he approved 6.5 billion naira for the establishment of cattle ranch in Katsina State, and immediately released 5 billion naira to the governor for that purpose. Now, cattle ranching and grazing is a private business, and I do not think that it's proper for government to be involved in the sponsoring of private businesses. But I agree that it's important to agree on a formula in ending the clashes between the ranchers and also the farmers. But this should best be done by asking those who are interested in grazing to approach the owners of the land to make necessary negotiations and agree on the modalities for which such exercise could be done. Now recall that in the southern part of Nigeria, all the governors met and made a proclamation that they had banned open grazing. And some states like Ondo, Ekiti, Rivers, Delta, and some other states have since promulgated laws prohibiting open grazing. And so it's within the powers of the governors of the state to direct affairs for which the Constitution has allowed them. You also recall that in places in the north, there is prohibition of matters like alcohol. For instance, businessmen are not permitted to sell or trade in alcohol in some parts of the north. And so the president cannot force such a governor, for instance, to allow the sale of alcohol if it's inconsistent with the custom or faith of those people. So if other parts of the country...
Let me come in there. Could you talk to us about the Grazing Reserve Law of 1965, applicable as it were, only in the states within the north, and then this bill on grazing reserves establishment 2016? Can you talk to us about that?
What I can tell you clearly is that in law, once there is a conflict between legislations, it is presumed that the later in time will prevail. Now, if there is grazing route established in 1965 by any gazette or by any law, and the Land Use Act was subsequently promulgated by the National Assembly and is now incorporated into the Constitution, whatever conflict exists between grazing routes, which is just about what cattle would, the route through which cattle will pass, and then ownership of land, which includes the route, development, farming, and all other things. Such law of 1965 is automatically incorporated into the later legislation, which is the Land Use Act of 1978. So to that extent, I believe anybody affected by any designation of any grazing route should go to court and challenge the power of the president.
Ẹ káàbọ̀ padà, àtọ̀tún àtòsì ẹgbọ́n tó ní kálukú sọ, Arise TV ló ní àwọn fídíòs yẹn. Gbogbo àwọn tó ń gbé wá ẹ̀ mo listing mo wò látòkè délẹ̀ pátá. Mo gbọ́n tó ní kálukú sọ lórí open grazing. Tí gọ́fìmẹ̀ntì tó sọ pé dandan sẹ́, àfi láò, àfi káwọn tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ padà. Àfi kélédùn ọba òkè má ṣàánú wa. Àti gbá bóná, àti wọ one chance. Àfi k'Ọlọ́run ẹlẹ́dàá Elédùmarè kó ṣàṣàánú wa kó yọ wá ń bẹ̀ ni. Àfi bí ẹni pé yẹn ò tó, as if that is not enough. Àfi bí ẹni pé lèyí ò tó. A mà tún gbọ́ o, Minister for Communications tá a mọ̀ sí Alhaji Lai Mohammed. Wọ́n mà jáde lórí ọ̀rọ̀ àwọn Boko Haram tí wọ́n láwọn ti kí wọ́n dáríjà wọn tá à ń pè ní repentant Boko Haram. Repentant Boko Haram tí wọ́n sọ pé àwọn bẹ̀bẹ̀ páwọn ò ṣe bẹ́ẹ̀ mọ́. Lai Mohammed ti jáde o, wọ́n ní gbogbo tí oníkálùkù wá ń pè lọ́tún pè lósì pé ẹ má dáríjì wọ́n, àfi kẹ́ bí wọ́n léèrè ẹ̀jẹ̀ gbogbo àwọn ẹni tí wọ́n pa. Lai Mohammed ní kò possible o. Wọ́n ní gbogbo yín tọ́ntẹ́ tó bá yín lẹ́nu ni. Wọ́n nítorí pé òfin kan ti wà nílẹ̀ tó sọ pé tí àwọn Boko Haram bá láwọn ò ṣe mọ́, kí òfin yẹn ní kí wọ́n dáríjì wọ́n ni kó sì gbà wọ́n padà sílùú. Ń tẹ̀mí wa sọ ni wípé ṣó dáa. Torí pé àwọn táwọn ẹni yìí sọdá láìnílé aláìlára wà ní IDP camp. Ṣùgbọ́n nísìn àwọn Boko Haram yìí, èyí tí wọ́n máa rán lọ lóyìnbó fún rehabilitation wà nù wọn. Èyí tí wọ́n máa fún nílé fún lóúnjẹ fún gbogbo ẹ̀ wà, gbogbo wọn tiẹ̀ ni wọ́n ti fún wọn ní ibi tí wọ́n máa wà báyìí. Àwọn ọ̀kọ́ àwọn lọ IDP. Gbogbo àwọn tí wọ́n kó lọ sí IDP sì wà láìDP. Wọ́n ti sọ ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ dá láìlóbìí. Wọ́n sọ àìmọye ìyàwó dá láìlọ́kọ. Wọ́n sọ àìmọye ọkọ dá láìníyàwó. Wọ́n sọ àìmọye ọmọ dá láìní bàbá. Lẹ́ni nísìn àwọn Boko Haram ń rìn kiri. Àwọn ọ̀tọ̀kùlú ti wá sọ̀rọ̀ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ yìí o. Mo fẹ́ ká lọ wo àwọn fídíòs àwọn nǹkan táwọn ọ̀tọ̀kùlú sọ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ Boko Haram tí Lai Mohammed sọ pé kò possible láíláí pé kí wọ́n fìyà jẹ wọ́n àbí káwọn má dáríjì wọ́n àbí káwọn má jẹ́ kí wọ́n wà ní tí wọ́n kàn enjoy tó ń pè ní luxury. Mo ń padà bọ̀, ẹ jẹ́ ká jọ lọ fojú inú wò.
Nigeria's Minister for Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, has defended the federal government's decision not to prosecute repentant insurgents, saying it's in line with global practices. Now, the government took this position following the mass surrender of Boko Haram insurgents, with some Nigerians kicking against the de-radicalization and the rehabilitation initiative for the insurgents. But the minister said the call for the prosecution and killing of repentant insurgents rather than granting them amnesty is against global best practices. The minister also criticized the claim that the insurgents would be recruited into the Nigerian military. Journalist and social commentator Adeniyi Kunu is here with us in the studio to discuss the federal government's decision. Good morning, Adeniyi. Thank you very much.
Thank you one more time for having me here. I appreciate coming in. Yes.
It's a sticky, yes, definitely. Well, it's a sticky situation, isn't it? Just yesterday, we had counterterrorism expert David Otto on the show, and we were talking about the Taliban and their growth in Afghanistan of recently, of course. And in that, he did say that when it comes to war and conflict, culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning that, you know, it's all well and good for international people outside the center to put their emphasis or their opinions. Ultimately, it's the people who are native to a land who understand better. When we look at it through that perspective, the government's decision, the federal government's decision to focus on rehabilitation, is that to do with culture over strategy?
It's not well thought out, I have to say. I will always call for a country that functions for everybody, that is equitable, just, and of course accessible in terms of all the goodies of the country. But when it comes to the de-radicalization of some people, you need to ask the question, who are those de-radicalized already? That's a question. There's a key conversation here. It's about the faith of the people. It's about what they believe is right. Between 1979, when there was a battle against Russians, by the Mujahideens that transmuted to become the Taliban, officially recognized as such in 1996, there's never been any moment where they had a discussion about turning over a new leaf, and they did. Let's say this. We had a kind of pact signed by the American government April 2020 so that people, particularly the American army, will leave Afghanistan and the Taliban will behave themselves. Between that time of April 2020 and now, 3,000 people have been killed. 62% of those are from Afghanistan. The picture is, I've gone there to tell you that people have been radicalized into an ideology. People have tasted blood and the benefits of pilfering and all forms of illegality. It will be difficult. Now let's come to the home front and talk about it. One of the things that people fail to talk about is what form of religion do we practice? Because don't forget, let's not deceive ourselves. There's a religion at the center of this. Conservatism, extremism is tied to a religion. So what form of religion do we practice in the region of the country where insurgency is prevalent? Is Islam. One. Secondly, what have the governors of those states done to prevent the rise and the tide of radicalization? Little or nothing. The country was under military rule for 3 republics. At the birth of the 4th republic, what became most important to the governors of the North happened to be Sharia law. And that is one of the misfortunes of this country coming from the northern part of the country. So they felt comfortable in promoting a religion that they themselves wanted to make use of for their self-serving purpose. Because in societies where Sharia is practiced properly, people get proper education. People live in just societies. If I did a quick move to 1804, the reason for the jihad war of 1804 was injustice led by Uthman Dan Fodio, because he felt the Talakawas, as they are called today, were neglected. So coming back to 2021, I'd have to say that many governors of the North did not perhaps understand that they gave birth to this because of their neglect. Now, I go again to Borno when Kashim Shettima was the governor. Do not forget that the Yusuf guy that led Boko Haram before, he was killed. Listen, he was killed. He wasn't tried. He was killed by the Nigerian government, unjustly so, because anytime the police acts, they act on behalf of the executive arm of government. And up to today, the people that killed him unjustly, even if he was a criminal, he should have had his day in court. They still have not brought them to justice. So that must be clarified. Kashim Shettima appealed to a group of people that were Islamic learners and scholars, of which Yusuf was head. Let me win this election. I will definitely turn a new leaf. We'll be able to have a theocracy of sorts. They did this. They gave him the support of the Talakawas and Borno, and they turned their backs on him. That's the birth of all of this. Now, I'm saying the obvious because we can't take things in isolation. So over the years, we've seen people feel disenchanted from anything that the government has and believe they can't have a life there. Let's go another historical lane. As of 2000, more than half of the men in Borno didn't have an education. Everybody is created with survival instincts. In the absence of having the requisite skills for survival, the requisite education for survival, you still want to survive because it's an instinct. And that's where the talk about dog eating dog comes in. People want to survive. So the man sees the next person as a source of livelihood and doesn't care if the man goes. So crimes continue to fester. So when I talk about de-radicalizing the people, it's balderdash. You cannot de-radicalize these people because the first engagements that would have helped them not think of getting radicalized remains unprovided. Then the hypocrisy again of many people. Do not forget, Jonathan went to South Korea in 2012 and told us that those that were supporting Boko Haram were in his government. The records are there for people who know how to do their researches. And you cannot continue to look the other way in the name of this. Okay, let me go to Kano, for instance. A state...
Mr. Adeni, let's go on a quick break first,
right,
so that when we return, you can now expand
okay,
on this argument.
All right.
We'll be right back. We'll go on a short break now.
Welcome Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still joined by journalist and social commentator Adeniyi Kunu, and the topic of conversation is still the government's decision to rehabilitate. It seems to be taking a holistic approach. Before we went on break there, you were talking about how history has played a very strong role in what we're seeing here. Please continue.
Now, I want to say that it is impossible to de-radicalize a people if you have not rehabilitated those at respective IDP camps. That's a fact of the matter. A situation where the offender is suddenly given a new attirement, my coinage, don't check your dictionaries, please, a new attirement of acceptance, whereas the person that he committed the crimes against, whose wives got raped, whose children got killed, whose homes got burnt, are still left in IDP camps under a thatched roof leaking, whereas the person who killed comes to you and says, I've repented, and immediately you're making provision to send the person to some short-term courses abroad or make provision for a proper shelter and 3 square meal. The dynamics of the elements cannot even allow such processes work because the person you have offended have not been given any form of reprieve. I need to say this very clearly, that at the birth of this Sharia law that is contributing to this problem. Let's look at Kano State, for instance. In Islam, what you don't eat, what you don't drink, that is referred to haram, you don't profit from it. Kano State,
ought not to.
When they say ought not to, it's just syntax. The semantics of it is that you should not take a dime from what you don't eat or eat. For instance, somebody sells pig meat, pork, for instance. In Islam, it is actually not something you should eat. But science has proven that it has one of the healthiest oils. Let people do their researches. So let's not argue. People's faith are people's faith.
Absolutely.
How then do you profit from the meat sold and the VAT paid from pork meat? That in itself is the height of haram. Then you're talking about alcohol. The Kano State government, a PhD holder, Dr. Ganduje, will break bottles where people are selling alcoholic beverages, but it collects VATs paid from the same alcohol. Who is deceiving who? So the first thing we have to address, let's forget about this de-radicalization thing, because the first people they should deal with, attend to, are those that are still in IDP camps whose homes have been burnt. You can't make those that you say you are rehabilitating, whatever I want to say, rehabilitate, you can't make them your priority. It's a fact of the matter. So I think that it's a difficult job for Alhaji Lai Mohammed. I can understand that when you hold certain positions in government, you have to do, especially if you are the image maker of your government, you have to do everything possible not to make it appear so. But you see, one of the things we still do not get in our climb, not comparing ourselves to others, is that humility is also a key that opens door in governance. And one of the things that will help the leaders of this country now is to eat the humble pie, not the disgraceful pie, the humble pie, that admitting that there are certain things we cannot do because it appears overwhelming. And we'll be needing a lot more input of experts and goodwill Nigerians to help deal with the issues. There's no government that doesn't have its flaw. Ditto the Nigerian government. So Alhaji Lai Mohammed should understand, just in the words of my late father, you are better sane when you are lying to others. But when you lie to yourselves, you seem irredeemable. So I think that Alhaji Lai should understand that there are lots of things that the people who feels it, knows it, and the person who talks about it differently perhaps doesn't have a grasp of it.
Nee, let me come in here.
Yes, please.
And to put in proper perspective what Alhaji Lai Mohammed was saying in the United States. I think there were 2 key things that he mentioned. One is the fact that the repentant bandits or Boko Haram members will not be dealt with in the manner that it seems that people are suggesting because they're killers and blah, blah. Yeah. And 2, he said that they will not be absorbed into the Nigerian army, which is a key fallout of the Afghanistan thing that people are saying, you know. If you also notice, the commander of the multinational joint task force also made the same point, making reference to the United Nations remedy of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. Yeah. Are you therefore saying, when you say that you cannot de-radicalize, that we can't practice what the United Nations
the United Nations is suffering when it comes to armed conflict and bandits, combatants who have taken a new leaf and needed to be reabsorbed into the society.
One thing that is difficult to do is to bring the killer of your father, of your wife and children, back into the society where they committed a crime. It's half the picture for them to talk about rehabilitation, disarmament. The third part of that particular posture, as recommended by the United Nations, is the most difficult.
Reintegration?
You cannot, see, let me tell you, except of course the geography they want to occupy is in another part of the Nigerian space. But as far as we are concerned, what is the 1, 2, 3 year program, the blueprint that both of us or the three of us here can look at and say, indeed, this would work? These people, don't forget that I think over a year ago, some people actually went back to their communities because they were given a documentation that they have been de-radicalized. It is not enough to get a documentation showing that you have been de-radicalized. What is more important is that the people in question show proof by having stayed somewhere. For instance, let's look at the prisons, correctional centers now. I have been there not as an offender, but as somebody who visited with some other people for humanitarian causes. And the process of even dealing with those that are in prison appears to me more sensible than the people that committed more crimes. Because we're talking about radical elements. The word radical elements is deeper. We're talking about a crystallization of negative ideas that have become solidified by every phenomena, such that it is difficult for you to erode. So if you look at what was said, don't also forget, part of what we talked about, part of what the United Nations recommended, there has financial incentive. So
as they've done in Burundi,
thank you very
Somalia,
much. Yes, exactly.
Congo.
Part of it is financial incentive. This is a country where workers have not been paid 18K to 30. One, where medical doctors in their thousands are on strike because of government not fulfilling its side of the promise. Then tell me how boastful it gets for the same government, except of course, maybe it's the government of a United African Republic that will come and do that, where you now say these people in question will get what belongs to them. Let me tell you, I was at the International Office of Migration only this week. I think it was Tuesday, because at times you need to waka this waka, but they don't tell you the story. So look at what's happening. Lots of them were back, some yet to be attended to. You see, there should be a process. Immediately they come, they sign a form. It is not rocket science. And if you need to employ more hands to do that, you can do that. Just let me keep the things I saw off camera because nobody knew I was within the media space. So what I'm saying in essence, efforts are being made, but are these efforts thorough? Are these people in question? Can they really say, indeed, these things that government intends to do, government sees it through? So when we're talking about this process, don't forget also, we're talking about the government and a system where the educational sector is still, may go on strike soon. Don't forget, part of the de-radicalization also involves some form of education. I beg, maybe they know they talk this kind of thing. I'm trying to say that part of the process involve building, helping to build capacities so that these people in question that you have de-radicalized can begin to do some things for themselves. What is the 6 months, 1 year picture of skills acquisition for those people? Don't also forget another pointer to some of this facts. Up to now, we still have not had somebody explain to me why the Chibok girls could not speak English and they were preparing for WAEC. The language of the West African senior certificate examination is English, but most of them, 99.9, gave their interviews in Hausa. Come on, let's tell ourselves the truth. Most of these people that have become radicalized would be needing a language that would help them key into not only the northern system of doing things, the Nigerian system of doing things, so that if at all they've gained certain levels of skills, they can go to any part of the country being able to interact in the language that will help them up.
So you believe Nigeria doesn't have the framework to successfully execute this holistic approach?
Exactly what I am saying.
But not that the model that
doesn't work.
No. It is because, okay, look at, I have referred to the strike actions by medical doctors. I've talked about the non-fulfillment of the agreement with university lecturers. I've talked about the instances of out-of-school children in the country. So I have pointed to these issues
and the fact that there are references of perhaps certain levels of incapacities on the part of the people that lead us. And I have said here, and I'm saying it to the world, for instance, after, okay, I was talking about Boko Haram earlier. I should have mentioned Ali Modu Sharif, because Kashim Shettima was the penultimate one before this. Now, Kashim Shettima was in a positive, but I'm talking about Ali Modu Sharif earlier. Now, let's talk about none other now than Kashim Shettima. He built some schools. I have personally said that part of what can help is you can come to the South, for instance, and ask for help. You know, one of the things that the people up north lived, because I've lived there and I still have very good-minded people and friends there, literacy is one thing that is key. Literacy. If somebody is able to read and write, of course, if you're talking about Ajami, Arabic, and all of that, many of them, by virtue of, you know, the Quranic scholarship, are able to do that. But the language of commerce, politics, education in this country is English the last time I checked. And that is one of the things that they need to really learn to be able to penetrate the areas and ideas that they don't have. Don't forget, it is easy to get radicalized because you perhaps understand just a line of thought. But the vista created by virtue of literacy enables you to get into other thought processes that allows you to appreciate the ideology of other people. And that is the point that I'm trying to make here.
That's an interesting point that you raised.
Yes.
Because if you look at it, the word Boko Haram stemmed from, means Western education is bad.
Yes.
Whereas Taliban means student, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how does training and retraining the Almajiris, you know, I think it was Jonathan's administration at the point.
Yeah, built those schools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can that help? And then more importantly, in making this point, don't you think that those who are behind these ideas will use what the federal government did to the ex-militants that were rehabilitated, you know, from the Niger Delta, send some of them even abroad, etc. If it could be good for them, why will it be bad that they are trying to rehabilitate?
Oh, that's another very good, because I know some people you're actually sounded some people's thoughts who perhaps are watching us at the moment. But you see, we don't have those things on the same platter. The people in the Niger Delta, as many people have said or opined, are talking about addressing the injustices done to the soil. I've traveled in the creeks where the pipes are. I've entered the forest. And I know that the penury and the poverty of the real owners of Nigeria's mineral resource is incomparable. Forget about all the rappers you see, the Niger Delta people tie and all that. Those ones are still having their 3 square meters. The real people whose ancestral homelands are around where the pipelines are, they live in abject poverty. And for those who took up ammunition to fight for them, I think they did that, although not justified, to call attention to those things that perhaps many of them don't see. I dare say that the president has never, maybe joined the Civil War, maybe actually went to Saudi Arabia, but there are some uncharted grounds now that I can tell you that Nigeria's petroleum minister, in the person of President Muhammadu Buhari, has not visited those areas. And until he visits those areas, let them provide him all the security so that these things that I'm saying can be verified. So those people who took up arms to call the attention of government to the despoilation of their areas, excuse me, I have traveled in canoes in the brackish water of the Niger Delta, and I can tell you, fish is practically not there any longer, except you go to the area called Ahoda or Moku axis that connects you to the backside of the Niger River, where you are able to steal fish. So what I'm saying in essence here is we have to look at what is the justification for the killing of people and for the bombing of people. The people in the Niger Delta are saying, you are taking this crude, come and compensate the ground and the people properly. The people in the other regions that are bombing are killing people and say, don't get Western education. So it doesn't make sense for the people who are trying to be against the process that also helped to build the pipelines itself to be given such equal consideration. As far as I'm concerned, government must first of all be sincere, understand its incapacities, and we can have a nation for all of us to still be living in.
All right. Thank you very much, Adeni Kuno. I mean, that's brilliant as always.
Thank you
very
Thank
much.
you for sharing.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ẹ káàbọ̀ padà. Ẹgbọ́n tó ní kálukú sọ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ àwọn Boko Haram tí wọ́n ní kí wọ́n foríjì wọ́n yìí. Àfikọ́ lọ́run Elédùmarè ọba òkè kó kúkú ṣàánú wa lé lórí o torí mi ò mọ nǹkan téèyàn tó lè sọ sírú ọ̀rọ̀ ilé yìí à ń jèkúrú kó tán láwo àwọn tó ní kán gbọ́nwó ẹ̀ sáwò ní tó ń bè mí lẹ́rù sẹ́ ò ní pé lọ́run Elédùmarè kó ṣàánú wa kí ọ̀rọ̀ Nàìjíríà má lọ dàbí Afghanistan tó jẹ́ pé díẹ̀díẹ̀ àwọn Taliban yìí bí wọ́n ṣe tèrè tí wọ́n fi wọlé sí wọn lára l'Afghanistan lẹ́nìí àwọn ni wọ́n jo lórí àwọn ni wọ́n rúlù bẹ́ẹ̀ báyìí pírẹsidẹ́ǹtì ti wá bígbà wọn ló wà France pírẹsidẹ́ǹtì wọn ní Afghanistan àwọn tẹ́rọ́rìstì yìí ni wọ́n gbàlú kan nígbà táwa náà ń ṣàforíjì fún Boko Haram ọdọ́ wọ́n ti wá sọ pé rọ́ ni o ẹgbọ́n nù rìpọ́ọ̀tù yẹn pé Lai Mohammed sọ pé rọ́ ni àwọn ò gbà wọ́n sínú Nàìjíríà àmì tó Ọlọ́run ajé orí bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣùgbọ́n wọ́n gbà wọ́n wọn ò gbà wọ́n ṣáájà àwọn ẹni yóò sì ní ṣé ajá wọn ò ní padà sídìí èbí wọn ẹni nìyẹn lẹ́ẹ̀kejì gbogbo àwọn táwọn ẹni yìí ti pa ṣé wọ́n lè jí wọn padà mọ́ àti wọ̀ ná àti wọ̀ one chance àfikọ́ ló ń ṣàánú wa lórí ọ̀rọ̀ yìí former vice president tìlú Nàìjíríà Atiku Abubakar àwọn náà wọn ò ṣàìdásí Atiku Abubakar náà sọ̀rọ̀ tiẹ̀ ohun tó sì sọ yà mí lẹ́nu torí pé eléyìí fi hàn wá wípé àwọn náà ó ti ń kan àwọn olóṣèlú yìí náà wọ́n ti ń ròdòdó ẹjá lọ gbọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu Atiku Abubakar mò ń padà bọ̀.
By diverse segments of Nigerians that cut across the country and the growing agitations by many thoughtful Nigerians for a reset, for a less controlling, less suffocating, and less dictatorial center. More than 5 years later, it is obvious that Chido's admonition that we needed to fix Nigeria by heeding those calls in order to avoid a sleepwalking our way towards disaster has not been heeded. Rather, as a result, we seem to be sprinting full speed towards disaster. Yes, the Chibok girls had been kidnapped and held in captivity for 7 years. Yes, conflicts between herders and farmers had been with us before 2016. But who would have thought that our country would become a haven for kidnappers and all manner of bandits to the extent that their nefarious activities would become a major industry? They have been allowed to operate so openly and brazenly that it would surprise no one if they applied for registration with the Corporate Affairs Commission and listed on the Nigerian exchange. 5 years ago, the Abuja-Kaduna Road was not a virtual no-go area. The Southeast was not a virtual war zone, and Amotekun was not needed to protect lives and property in the Southwest. These are among the clearest evidence that the issues that were the focal point of the book that brought us here more than 5 years ago have become even worse. The calls for restructuring have not been heeded. Constitutional provisions on federal character have been ignored, and even symbolic gestures to make all groups feel that they are part of the Nigerian family have been scorned as though they are a sign of weakness. As a result, the agitations that turn more groups into Biafrans, quote, have become even more strident and in some cases violent. The book for which we are gathered here today, Remaking Nigeria, 60 years, 60 voices, goes a long distance in completing the circle started with We Are All Biafrans. It is an edited work with contributions from 60 Nigerians from a variety of backgrounds, callings, and ideological viewpoints. I will leave the detailed review to the book reviewer, but permit me to point out that the contributors, while not agreeing on everything, have a number of key things in common. These are their love for Nigeria, their desire that Nigeria remains one united country, and their demonstration that Nigeria in its current form is not working for Nigerians and needs to be fixed urgently so that it can do so. That fixing or restructuring will help in our nation-building project because it will help to foster a sense of nationhood out of our disparate groups, cultures, religions, and regions. It is obvious that a country is not necessarily a nation. Nationhood has to be forged through what we do as a country, and leadership is critical in the process of nation building. Leaders give direction, and the example they set determines the extent to which their followers will trust them. Without trust, there is no leadership. Without leadership, a country drifts and becomes more difficult to forge into a nation. Some contributors to the book have gone as far as to say that development will continue to elude us until we are able to forge that sense of nationhood. That is, until we deepen our nation-building process. This is understandable because of the growing frustrations we all feel at the slow pace of development and reversals in nation-building. Let me say, however, that both theoretically and historically, such sequencing is not entirely correct. Development cannot wait for nation building. In fact, neither development nor nation building needs wait for the other. Development can indeed help in nation building. We can walk and talk at the same time, can't we? Nation building has not ended in the United States of America, United Kingdom, Russia, China, and Belgium, to cite a few examples, yet they are among the most developed countries in the world. What we need to do is to work hard at both. In my view, we must restructure our country in a manner that allows various segments to develop at their own pace and not be held back by the center or other segments. Developed segments will spur development in other segments because what they do well will attract attention of others. That may make a Nigerian union more attractive and nation building much more easier. Our poor nation building record should not be an excuse for developmental inaction or backwardness. There is nothing in the current state of our nation building that prevents Adamawa, Kano, Lagos, or River states from enumerating the number of existing and prospective primary and secondary school students and properly planning educational development in their respective states for the next 5 years or 10. Classroom blocks to be built, teachers to be hired or trained, textbooks to be acquired, salaries to be paid, university spaces that will be required in the years to come, and so on and so forth. The same goes for roads and bridges, hospitals, and water supply. If they do this well, wouldn't Taraba, Benue, and others copy them? They will. If they do them well, wouldn't Anambra and Kogi states emulate them? They will. Nation building is not just what elites or government officials do. Trade, social and cultural exchanges by ordinary people are critical components of nation building. In fact, you cannot build a nation out of people who do not have meaningful interaction. And to facilitate meaningful interaction among peoples, you need infrastructural development, including roads, bridges, ports, markets, parks, and so on. In these efforts, governments lead the way, although the private sector has important roles to play once the government does the heavy lifting, provides incentives, and sets the rules for competition. Nothing in our imperfect union prevents Imo, Anambra, and Abia states from cooperating on infrastructure provisioning. In fact, I would argue that part of what is holding back our nation building is the lack of what we call development. Would anybody really argue that illiteracy, poverty, lack of opportunities, and hope are not contributing to the insurgencies that are tearing our country apart? What about the divisive rhetoric that have followed those insurgencies and agitations, as well as the banditry that are now rampant? Didn't the school leavers and graduates of the 1960s and 70s who had easier access to jobs and other opportunities have more faith in Nigeria than the school leavers and graduates of today who lack those opportunities? If the North as a region and Nigeria as a nation have done enough to check the encroachment of the Sahara Desert and the drying of Lake Chad, would the trajectory of the insurgency in the Northeast and the banditry across the North have been different? Very likely. If our youth are in school or gainfully employed, they would not be available in large numbers for recruitment into extremist or criminal organizations. And as we know, an organization that fails to recruit new members rarely lasts long. Some years ago, the late distinguished economist, Professor Ojetunji Aboyade, observed that his generation has the dubious distinction of having had better opportunities than their children. The same is the case with my generation, and it makes me very sad. So while our nation building has been imperfect and wobbly, it is not and should not be a good excuse for our very poor effort at development. Development inspires pride, hope, patriotism, emulation, and is a great magnet for patriots. When we start developing with what we have, more of our people will want to identify with the country, love the country, and commit their lives to the country. When that happens, especially with fairness and justice, nation building accelerates, however imperfectly. This is why I find it amusing when people declare Nigeria's unity as fixed and non-negotiable, while doing everything in their power to destroy that fragile unity. Nothing in the relationships among people is fixed for eternity. You cannot declare your marriage as non-negotiable while doing everything to sow seeds of discomfort in that marriage. Countries can be created by force. You can whip groups of people into forming a country, but you cannot whip them into forming a nation. Nations are built through conscious or even unconscious agreement by peoples who believe that being together is, on balance, more beneficial than being apart. Development and nation building do not happen by themselves. They are guided by people, especially leaders, thoughtful, insightful, and visionary leaders who are willing to make sacrifices and reach compromises. When people see their leaders making those efforts genuinely and experience improvements in their lives, they are likely to follow. Over the past 6 years, the leadership of this country at the federal level hardly embarked on nation building. They may have been making utterly confusing and unproductive efforts at economic development. However, it can be rightly argued that they have been unbuilding the nation by taking conscious and deliberate actions that not only make nation building more difficult, but also undo the achievement made in that regard by previous administrations. As we all know, there were deliberate attempts made since the 1960s to forge a nation out of Nigeria. States creation, federal character, the NYSC, power rotation, unity schools, and multiple federal agencies. However imperfect, these were genuine attempts at giving each segment of the country a sense of belonging and a semblance of justice and equity, and promote interactions among our peoples. All it has taken in one administration in 6 short years to tear up the fabric of that unity and make more Nigerians lose faith in Nigeria and question the rationale of having one united country. One lesson there for all of us is the need to always be vigilant and be prepared to defend our democracy, for it is through the democratic process that we can more easily promote the unity of our country. I strongly believe that Nigeria can and will remain one strong and united nation with significant strides in economic development to improve the lives of our peoples. However, we must not take it for granted. We must work hard at it and make necessary compromises to accommodate one another. Hard work and compromises are necessary for restructuring the country, especially in terms of the relationship between the center and the constituent states and between the public sector and the private sector. We do not need to reinvent the wheel.
Former Vice President of Nigeria, ní ayé Ọbásanjọ́, at Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, òun la gbọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu wọn yìí. Gbogbo tí wọ́n sì sọ bẹ́ẹ̀, gbogbo àná gbọ́ lórí ọ̀rọ̀ wípé agbọ́ ti Boko Haram, agbọ́ ti gbogbo ẹ̀, ṣùgbọ́n àgbọ̀ bá dìtì rí tẹ́lẹ̀, ọ̀rọ̀ yóò burú tó yìí tẹ́lẹ̀, gbogbo àná la gbọ́ nǹkan sọ. Bákan náà ni pé báwọn èèyàn fẹ́ yà pé kò nídìí tó bá jẹ́ pé security wà nílùú yìí, kò nídìí tí wọ́n pè lámọ̀tẹ́kùn, kò nídìí oríṣiríṣi àwọn security tó jáde ń sìn, nítorí wípé ìlú yìí ò tòrò ló fà á. Lórí ọ̀rọ̀ ní security wá dé yìí, olóyè Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò Ganiu Adams wọ́n ṣe àwọn ìpàdé kan náà pẹ̀lú àwọn àgbààgbà àtọ̀tọ̀kùlú ìlú Yorùbá. Tẹ́ ẹ bá wo fídíò tí mo fẹ́ fi hàn yìí, ẹ̀yin náà rí wípé n tó dùn mọ́ mi ni pé lágbára Ọlọ́run àwọn Yorùbá àgbààgbà Yorùbá náà ti ń parapọ̀ láti ṣe n tó tọ́. Àgbààgbà Yorùbá náà ti ń parapọ̀ torí gbogbo ọ̀nà tí gọ́ọ̀mẹ̀ntì ń gbà yìí, ọ̀nà àti gbàlúwa lọ́wọ́ wa ní sẹ́ẹ̀. Ṣùgbọ́n àwọn àgbààgbà ilẹ̀ Yorùbá náà ti wá ń dìde, àwọn náà ti ń ṣe mítìnì, kódà ti dẹ́gbẹ́ kan lẹ̀ tán pè ní security, ẹgbẹ́ security, joint security wọ́n ti dálẹ̀. Èyí tó jẹ́ pé ní Ogun State, Gani Adams ó bá àwọn àgbààgbà ìṣe mítìnì. Àwa náà mójú débẹ̀, ẹ̀jẹ̀ agbọ́kìlà bá bọ̀ bẹ̀.
sí gbọ̀ngàn ńlá kan ontech event center nílùú Abẹ́òkúta nípínlẹ̀ Ògùn níbi tí Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ti ké sí àwọn ládéládé, àwọn gómìnà àtàwọn àgbààgbà ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n ilẹ̀ káàárọ̀ òjíire láti wá sọ̀rọ̀ nípa ètò ààbò bó ṣe mẹ́ẹ̀ ní àsìkò yìí, pàápàá lórí bí oríṣiríṣi ẹgbẹ́ elétò ààbò nílẹ̀ Yorùbá ṣe parapọ̀ láti wá ọ̀nà àbáyọ sí ibà Gani Adams. Nínú ọ̀rọ̀ ẹ̀ náà ló ti sọ pé àgbà ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n kan láti yunifásitì ìpínlẹ̀ Èkó Olúgbénga Akíngbẹ̀yìn ló ṣe ìdánilẹ́kọ̀ọ́ lórí ọ̀nà àbáyọ sí làásìgbò tó wọlé dé báyìí. Nínú ọ̀rọ̀ ẹ̀ náà ló ti sọ pé.
Báyọ̀ ni pé gbogbo ẹgbẹ́ tó wà fún ààbò tó jẹ́ ti àwa Yorùbá òun la kójọ lénìí láti dáàbò bo ilẹ̀ Yorùbá àti pé láti ṣiṣẹ́ pẹ̀lú àwọn agbófinró lórí ààbò ilẹ̀ Yorùbá àti wípé torí àwọn ọ̀daràn tó wà ní ilẹ̀ Yorùbá tó ń dà wá láàmú apara wa papọ̀ OPC vigilante àwọn ọlọ́dẹ àti Àgbẹ̀kọ̀yà pẹ̀lú CONSAC àtàwọn ẹgbẹ́ mi ti darapọ̀ mọ́ wa láti dáàbò bo ilẹ̀ Yorùbá lórí ààbò àti pé táyè bá wà fún jàǹgbara lọ́jọ́ iwájú láti jàǹgbara fún ilẹ̀ Yorùbá. Nǹkan tá a pè ìpàdé ìfún ni a wá pè pé ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n láti UNILAG tó jẹ́ professor kó wá fún wa ní ìdánilẹ́kọ̀ọ́. A pè commissioner of police wọ́n send representative tó jẹ́ head of operation gbogbo Ogun State Police Command. Director of SSS a pè àwa wọ́n send representative tó yẹ pé head of operation wọn àwọn ló wà ń bí báyìí láti wá sọ̀rọ̀ wọ́n dẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀ ìwúrí a dẹ̀ pa àwọn ọba wa kábíyèsí ọba wa ńlá Aláké of Ẹ̀gbá ó rán olúwẹ̀ torí kábíyèsí òsì Nàìjíríà báyìí wọ́n lọ́ọ́ lo ìbò wọ́n rán olúwẹ̀ àti ọ̀pá àṣẹ pé wọ́n wá ṣojú wọn ọba Olówódé àtàwọn ọba míì wọ́n wà lórí ìjókòó wọ́n dẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀ dáadáa a dúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ Ọlọ́run pé Ọlọ́run fún wa ní àsìkò yìí ìtẹ̀síwájú máa wà á ní dúró níbi tá a bá dé yìí nítorí pé ìpínlẹ̀ 4 la ti ṣe a máa gbérù pàdé yìí lọ sí Èkìtì àti Oǹdó ní ọjọ́ iwájú tí a máa bá gbogbo àwọn ẹgbẹ́ wa àgàgà àwọn ẹgbẹ́ yìí tó wà ní ìpínlẹ̀ yẹn kọ̀ọ̀kan wọ́n máa gbà á lálejò táwọn máa ṣerú pàdé yìí eléyìí máa fa ìrẹ́pọ̀ nínú àwọn ẹgbẹ́ tó wà fún ààbò àbí ìjàǹgbara ó dẹ̀ a máa ti ṣiṣẹ́ síwájú gẹ́gẹ́ bí Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò máa ti ṣiṣẹ́ lórí àwọn socio-cultural group bá ṣe máa wà papọ̀ eléyìí ni ti ààbò máa ti ṣiṣẹ́ lórí socio-cultural group tó dà pé àwọn ẹgbẹ́ tó ti ní agbára jọlẹ̀ máa ti ṣiṣẹ́ lé lórí wọn iṣẹ́ ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ nìyẹn kò ní dúró lórí ààbò nìkan ìbáṣepọ̀ ilẹ̀ Yorùbá àṣepọ̀ ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ẹnu kókó ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ló jẹ mí lógún lóòótọ́ kì í ṣe gbogbo alágbára lẹ máa rí lẹ́ẹ̀kan náà ṣùgbọ́n tó bá ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ wọ́n máa darapọ̀ mọ́ yín tó bá yá.
Olú ti ìlú Owódé Ẹ̀gbá kábíyèsí ọba Kọ́láwọlé Àrẹ̀mú Ṣówẹ̀mímọ́ náà bá Aláròyé sọ̀rọ̀ ohun tí bàbá sọ rèé.
Ìpàdé tá a ṣe lénìí ni nípa ààbò fún ìwọ̀ oòrùn gúúsù Nàìjíríà South West. Ààbò ṣe kókó nípa ìgbésí ayé ẹ̀dá ká lè sùn ká lè pa ojú adé méjèèjì. Bí gbogbo wa ti rí nǹkan tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ nílùú Nàìjíríà lọ́wọ́lọ́wọ́ báyìí à ń fi àsìkò yìí bẹ̀ àwọn ìjọba pé kí wọ́n jọ̀wọ́ kí wọ́n bá ìkúpù àwọn agbófinró wa nípa àwọn agbésùmọ̀mí darandaran tó ń kidnap àwọn èèyàn wa tí wọ́n ń rape àwọn èèyàn wa tí wọ́n jẹ́ káwọn àgbẹ̀ wọ́n lè lọ sóko mọ́ gàrí tí wọ́n jẹ́ tí wọ́n ẹ̀rù ti ń ba gbogbo èèyàn lánàá wọ́n ti gbé ọmọ bàbá wa kan tó ń lọ sóko tí wọ́n ń béèrè 20 million lọ́wọ́ ẹ̀ àwa wò pé Ọ̀túnba Gani Adams ààrẹ gbogbo ilẹ̀ Yorùbá wa rò pé ó bẹ́tà ká pera wa jọ àwọn ọmọ Oòduà ká bára wa sọ̀rọ̀ nípa ààbò ní agbègbè wa ń bí ààbò dẹ̀ ṣe pàtàkì ní gbogbo tó ṣẹlẹ̀ lénìí sí ẹ̀rí lẹ́kítọ́rà wa tó ń pè wá ẹ̀rí bó ṣe bá wa sọ nípa ààbò ọ̀nà tá a lè gbé gbà ọ̀gá ọlọ́pàá tó wá represent commissioner ìyẹn náà bá sọ nípa ààbò ọ̀nà tá a máa gbé gbà wọn nípa ààbò wa nítòsí ń bí ààbò yẹn dẹ̀ ṣe kókó fún wa nítorí pé a gbọ́dọ̀ tọ́ra wa jẹ a gbọ́dọ̀ ṣe iṣẹ́ ṣe ó làgbà nígbà tẹ́mi sọ̀rọ̀ mo ní ó bẹ́tà ká sọ fún wọn pé Yorùbá ni wá àjèjì kọ́kọ́ gbọ́dọ̀ máa ralẹ̀ mọ́ ọmọ onílé Àyìnlá Ọmọwúrà kọrin ó lájòjì tó halẹ̀ mọ́ ọmọ onílé ohun tó gbé wọn wá ló máa gbé wọn sá lọ akọjá èèyàn tí ẹnì kọ́kọ́ lè máa dẹ́rùbà ọmọ Yorùbá ni wá mo fàṣìkò èrò àwọn bàbá àwọn ọlọ́dẹ àwọn ọ̀tẹ̀ṣe làgbà ká jẹ́wọ́ ọmọ ọkọ pé Yorùbá ni wá ó dá mi lójú débẹ̀ ẹ wo àwọn nílùú òyìnbó àwọn ọlọ́pàá wọn máa ń wọ bulletproof bọ́ Ọlọ́run kẹwàá nílẹ̀ Yorùbá àwa lè tó ju bulletproof lọ lágbára Ọlọ́run ẹ jẹ́ ká sowọ́pọ̀ ká lè ṣe ohun tó yẹ ká ṣe láti rí i pé ààbò dájú nílẹ̀ Yorùbá.
Aṣojú fún ẹgbẹ́ Voice of Reasoning ọ̀kan lára ẹgbẹ́ àwọn ọmọ Yorùbá alàgbà Owólabí Ọládẹ̀jọ́ náà sọ̀rọ̀ ojú tó ń sì fi wo ohun tó wà nílẹ̀ yìí yàtọ̀ gédéǹgbè pàápàá irú ìpàdé tí wọ́n pè yìí.
ó yẹ kí Yorùbá ó change orúkọ ẹ̀ sí alátiṣe. ṣé o mọ̀ tó máa látiṣe? gẹ́gẹ́ bí mo ṣe sọ lẹ́ẹ̀kan, ọ̀rọ̀ ìyàbò kò ń ṣe nǹkan tó ń sọ níta gbangba, kì í ṣe ọ̀rọ̀ ọjà ojú ọjà. àájọ pera wa sínú ilé, àá wò ó tí ààbò ò bá sí fún ẹ, ààbò tèmi gan ò tí ì pé. kálukú wà mọ́ jẹ́ alátiṣe tí ó mà ti ṣe ara ẹ̀. mo sọ kinní kan, ṣé ní gbogbo ọtán jókòó síbí? à ń tanra wa ni. ẹ pè sójà, ẹ pè ọlọ́pàá kó máa bá yín ṣe strategy tẹ́ fi dáàbò bo ìlú yín. ẹ pè DSS kó máa ṣe strategy tẹ́ fi dáàbò bo ìlú yín. àbí ẹ̀yin lè sanwó oṣù fún, tẹ́ ẹ bá pè tí ò bá dá yín lò kí lẹ fẹ́ ṣe. ó dìgbà tá a bá mọ̀ pa láti ṣe ni orúkọ wa, àwa la máa mọ bá a ti máa ṣe nǹkan tá à ń fẹ́ tá a fi bọ́ sí i. eléyìí tẹ̀ ń pera yín kiri wọ̀nyí, ẹ jẹ́ àjọmọ́ tanra wa jẹ́ nsọ.
alága gbogbo ọmọ ẹgbẹ́ OPC nílẹ̀ adúláwọ̀ ọ̀túnba olóṣègùn ògúnpìtàn náà ránṣẹ́ sí gbogbo ọmọ Yorùbá àti ìdí tí ìgbésẹ̀ ṣe gbọdọ̀ wáyé báyìí.
ọ̀rọ̀ yẹn ti kọjá àfaradà, ṣùgbọ́n lára àwọn nǹkan tí a lè ṣe láti fi dáàbò bo ara wa òun ni ìpàdé tí wọ́n ṣe lénìí. torí wọ́n ní tó bá gbọ́ gbègbè tó bá bá wọn gbé kọ́ má gbé sẹ́kùlé wa. gbogbo àwọn ọmọ Yorùbá pátápátá láti ṣera wa lọ́kan káàdẹ̀ gbáradì láti dáàbò bo gbogbo àwọn èèyàn wa, nítorí pé ọwọ́ tí nǹkan ń bá lọ báyìí tí a bá fọwọ́ yẹpẹrẹ mú ó máa yà wá lẹ́nu. dídí kó máa yà wá lẹ́nu òun náà ṣe pé àpéjọ èní yìí kí gbogbo wa ṣera wa lóṣùṣù ọwọ̀. ìṣọ̀kan Yorùbá òun ló jẹ wá lógún. tí gbogbo bá ti fi mọ̀ ṣọ̀kan, gbogbo àwọn jàǹdùkú ìwọ̀n lè ráyè wá rìn wa. ṣùgbọ́n láì jẹ́ pàfi ara wa ṣọ̀kan, wọ́n á kàn máa mú wa lẹ́yọ kọ̀ọ̀kan, wọ́n máa ṣe wá lọ́ṣẹ́ ni. so mo rò pé ìṣọ̀kan òun ni.
olóyè Isaiah Ògúnyínká ẹni tí í ṣe olórí àwọn ọlọ́dẹ nílẹ̀ Yorùbá náà sọ̀rọ̀ nípa agbára tó ṣì wà dáadáa lọ́wọ́ àwọn ọmọ káàárọ̀ òjíire bó tilẹ̀ jẹ́ pé ìṣẹ̀lẹ̀ ìjínigbé ìfipábánilòpọ̀ táwọn Fúlàní ń kó bá àwọn èèyàn nílẹ̀ Yorùbá kò kéré. ẹ gbọ́ ohun tí bàbá sọ.
bí ọ̀rọ̀ ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ṣe ń lọ lọ́wọ́lọ́wọ́ yìí kò tẹ́ wa lọ́rùn rárá, ṣe nǹkan tá a nífẹ̀ẹ́ sí rárá. orúkọ wọn baba ńlá wa la máa padà jẹ́ Àgbẹ̀kọ̀yà náà ni a máa kọ̀ ìyá yìí, Ọlọ́run máa kọ̀ ó tàbí tó lọ́fẹ́ bá wa kọ̀. wọn lè fi àwa lè máa wò wá kíyà máa jẹrẹ á lọ báyìí. Haúsá Fúlàní tán bá ti mú èèyàn tán bá mú dé station á release ẹ̀, a máa lọ á ní ọ̀dà látòkè, á ní ọ̀dà from the top. àwọn tó pa tó balẹ̀ ẹ̀jẹ̀ yẹn kọ́ kí ni ká pé ọ̀dà abẹ yẹn gbogbo nǹkan wọn ìlànà ẹ̀fà fún kódà wọn ní ká kó ìbọn lẹ̀, wọn ní ká lọ kó bọn wá. mo dẹ̀ lọ àdírẹ́sì wọn lórí rédíò pé nígbà tá a bá kó bọn lẹ̀ àwọn Haúsá tó ń kó bọn kiri yẹn kọ́ a máa dùn bu wa mọ́lé ni, a ò lè kó bọn ti wálẹ̀ o. mo lọ àdírẹ́sì wọn bẹ́ẹ̀ wọ́n dẹ̀ gbà bẹ́ẹ̀ fún wa. so ń pàdé èyí gbogbo nǹkan yìí Ọlọ́run ó tásìkò tọ́lọ́ máa bá fi òpin sí báyìí, torí pé ó tásìkò tí Yorùbá náà máa yọra wálẹ̀ o, a máa yọra wálẹ̀ torí tá a bá bójú ẹ̀ wò láti olden days láti bẹ̀rẹ̀ yé wa tá a ti ń bà bọ̀ Yorùbá kì í ṣẹ́ ní ẹ̀yìn, Yorùbá kì í ṣẹ́ ní ẹ̀yìn. kò sí ìjọba kan tó ń ṣe láti gba ayé àtàfàbalẹ̀ wa bá Yorùbá ń bẹ̀, Yorùbá kì í ṣẹ́ ní ẹ̀yìn. wọ́n dẹ̀ wà fẹ́ sọ wá di ẹni tẹ̀mọ́lẹ̀ adẹ̀fẹ́ kọ́ àní jẹ́ ní tẹ̀mọ́lẹ̀ lágbára Ọlọ́run gbogbo ẹ̀ ló máa kúrò. ọgbọ́n bẹ nú, ọgbọ́n bẹ o, ọgbọ́n yẹn ni o fẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí jáde sí tàdé máa lò fúnra wa. kò sí wàhálà, a lè máa lò bọn, a lè máa làdá, a dẹ̀ bá wọn jà, a dẹ̀ máa ṣẹ́gun lágbára Ọlọ́run. so bó ṣe rí nìyí.
bẹ́ẹ̀ gẹ́gẹ́ ni alàgbà yìí olóyè Davis Ọládipúpọ̀ alága ẹgbẹ́ Àgbẹ̀kọ̀yà lẹ́kọ̀ọ́ náà kò ṣàìtàn ìmọ́lẹ̀ sí ọ̀nà àbáyọ tọ́rọ̀ bá rí bí ó ṣe rí lónìí. ohun tó sọ rèé.
yìí tó bá bó ṣe wáyé yìí á jẹ́ nǹkan tó máa tà wá ní olóbó, tó máa jí wa dìde wípé ẹ̀tọ́ ìbò dáàbòbò wa ó jẹ́ pàtàkì, ká má bàa ṣègbè, kí àwọn ọmọ tó ń bọ̀ lẹ́yìn lọ́la kó má bàa ṣépè fún àwa tá a wà láyé ń sìn. torí tá a bá rí ohun rere ṣe sílẹ̀ fún wọn tó bá di ọjọ́ ọ̀la wọn á gbé wa ṣépè wọn á ní kí la bá wọn fáyé fún àwọn bàbá tiwa wọn ṣèlú yìí dáadáa àwọn Awólọ́wọ̀ èmi lọ léèwé ọ̀fẹ́ mo lọ léèwé ọ̀fẹ́ mo dẹ̀ jàǹfààní kí ló wá dé tí ò bá rí bẹ́ẹ̀ kí ọ̀rọ̀ má tọ́ sí pé ó yẹ ká jí gìrì fún ẹ̀tọ́ ìdáàbòbò wa pàápàá jùlọ èyí tá a jókòó ṣe léni yìí eléyìí ló fi hàn dájúdájú gbogbo àgbáyé pé àwa Yorùbá ọ̀rọ̀ kan là ń sọ ohun tá à ń pariwo fún tá à ń fẹ́ kíjọba ṣe fún wa kò ní pé wọ́n fún wa ní security ètò ìdáàbòbò tó pé kọ́ mọ́ máa gbé Haúsá lọ sílẹ̀ Yorùbá máa gbé Ìgbò lọ sílẹ̀ Haúsá tí ò mọ̀nà kó fún wa state police wa kó grant ẹ̀ totally torí afọ́jú àlejò lè mọ ibi tí wọ́n sin afọ́jú sí eléyìí là ń tọrọ là ń bẹ̀rù lọ́wọ́ ìjọba kan ṣe fún wa.
ọ̀gá ọlọ́pàá ọ̀gbẹ́ni Abọ́láńlé tó wá ṣojú kọmíṣánná ọlọ́pàá ti ìpínlẹ̀ Ògùn náà bá àwọn ẹgbẹ́ elétò ààbò ilẹ̀ Yorùbá lóṣìṣì sọ̀rọ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ gẹ́gẹ́ ló tún kìlọ̀ ohun tí wọ́n gbọ́dọ̀ ṣọ́ra fún.
apá Nàìjíríà tí ò mẹ́rin báyìí torí báwọn sí omi ó ṣẹlẹ̀ àwọn àgbàlagbà rẹ̀ sọ wípé pépèpé tó bá bá wọn gbé wọn lè sẹ́yìn ní ẹ̀ torí ìdí èyí ni àwọn bàbá wa ọ̀pọ̀ ìlú tí wọ́n fi gbé ìpàdé ìgbọ̀dọ̀ ṣẹlẹ̀ láti kára wa ní láti kára wa jì láti ká gbogbo agbègbè wa ó ṣe pàtàkì púpọ̀ àní ilé ìlú pé pípẹ́ tí wọ́n gbé gbogbo mùtúmù yóò dìde torí ibi tí ọ̀rọ̀ ààbò wà ní kì í ṣe ọ̀rọ̀ ẹnìkan ọ̀rọ̀ gbogbo wa ni torí àwọn àgbàlagbà sọ pé wọ́n ní ọ̀rọ̀ ọ̀rẹ́ ọlọ́rọ̀ sọ́kò tó bá darí owó tó rọ̀ sójú àwọn àgbàlagbà. So,
oníwà ti wí bẹ́ẹ̀ pàápàá ni ẹlẹ́yìn ti sọ lájorí ohun tí wọ́n sì fẹnu kò lé lórí ni pé ọmọ Yorùbá kò gbọdọ̀ sùn lásìkò yìí nítorí iṣẹ́ ń bẹ lórí ètò ààbò nílé àti lóko wa.
ẹ káàbọ̀ padà Gani Adams òun la gbọ́ tó sọ̀rọ̀ yìí Yorùbá ní a ò gbọ́dọ̀ finá sórí òrùlé sùn Yorùbá sì ní má foko mi dáná wọn níjọ́ kan ṣoṣo báyìí là ń ṣòfin ẹ̀ nígbà tó bá ti jẹ́ pé àgbààgbà ti rí ní tó yẹ kán rí táwọn náà dẹ̀ ti sọ ní tó yẹ kán sọ láìpẹ́ yìí lágbára Ọlọ́run mọ̀ pé gbogbo ọgbọ́n tíjọba ń dá yìí láti gbàlúwa lọ́wọ́ wa Ọlọ́run á bá wa bẹ́ gidi náà bẹ̀ ó ní wọ́n tó ń sọ pé dandan àfi kókún Grazing tó wà nílẹ̀ Yorùbá náà yìí pàápàá àfi kí Fúlàní lẹ́yìn táwọn gọ́fúnà ti ṣe mítìn báwọn ò fókún Grazing ìjọba ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ wàá fẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ tiẹ̀ ṣe bóbìnrin ti ń tàtọ̀rìn ọkùnrin náà kó tàtọ̀rìn káwọ ẹni tí ò lómi lẹ́yìn ẹsẹ̀ jura wọn lọ bóyá gọ́fúnà ló nílùú ni o bóyá pírẹsidẹ̀ntì ló bá wọn ní stéètì wọn ni o ẹjẹ́ àwo kí ni tó fẹ́ ṣẹlẹ̀ òun láti ń gbọ́ táwọn stéètì kọ̀ọ̀kan ti ń fohùn lẹ̀ yìí ọ̀dọ̀ mo gbọ́ o wípé Ọ̀ṣun stéètì àwọn tí wọ́n dídì lọ ya máàkì ilẹ̀ fún wọn ni wípé káwọn èèyàn máa wípé káwọn Fúlàní kí wọ́n máa ṣókún Grazing àmọ́ tẹ́ ẹ̀ bá gbàgbé ní ìjẹta oníjẹta yìí làwọn Fúlàní ìpa 5 sóko ní Mọdákẹ́kẹ́ táwọn èèyàn ti ẹ̀ ń gbé rúmọ̀ sí kiri pé ìjà Mọdákẹ́kẹ́ àti Ifẹ̀ tó ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ rárá Fúlàní ló ń ṣiṣẹ́ yẹn Fúlàní kódà láìpẹ́ yìí ni wọ́n mú nínú wọn tí wọ́n bá ìmọye ìbọn rẹpẹtẹ lọ́wọ́ òun nìkan ṣoṣo tó bá jẹ́ pé gọ́fìmẹ̀ntì fẹ́ ṣe dáadáa ni gbogbo kéèsì àwọn lédìké àwọn gbogbo ó yẹ kó ìtìjú yẹ kó ti mú wọn kó ti káńsù ẹ̀. mo fẹ́ rí fídíò fúlàní kan ṣoṣẹ́ mú yẹn níjẹta oníjẹta yìí ìjẹta àbáná pàápàá àná tó ń ṣe Sunday on the 21 of August àná ni àná Sunday of another Saturday 21st of August èyí ni Sunday 22nd of August bẹ̀tà àná 21st of August ni wọ́n mú fúlàní ọta àbọ̀ rẹpẹtẹ àìmọye ìbọn ni wọ́n bá lọ́wọ́ òun nìkan AK-47 mò ń bọ̀ ẹ jẹ́ ká lọ wo fídíò yẹn. tírú eléyìí ṣẹlẹ̀ sáwọn fúlàní tó wá jẹ́ pé president ò rí wọn ráwọn yẹn prosecute àfi Yorùbá ẹ wò mọ́ hàhà lọ́wọ́ ẹ̀ nǹkan tó fà rèé torí pé wọ́n wò pé nígbà tí wọ́n fìsì ibì kan ní Yorùbá náà ṣe sọ pé ó dáa àfi káwọn náà máa lọ. mo fẹ́ fi announcement kékeré kan kí n tó máa lọ Ọlọ́run ṣeun pé mo rántí kí n tó máa lọ mo fẹ́ fi àsìkò yìí kí ìkan nínú àwọn ìyá mi dáadáa tó bá sọ pé die hard fans ìyá tó jẹ́ pé àìmọye èèyàn ló ti bá mi polówó bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ fún ìyá súnà ìlú Òrù màmá mo kí yín káàbọ̀ padà sí Nàìjíríà o màmá lágbára Ọlọ́run dúdú tẹ́ wá dúró sí Nàìjíríà fásìkò díẹ̀ yìí náà ẹ ní ṣòfò ẹ ní ṣọ̀fọ̀ ọmọ lágbára Ọlọ́run mo kí yín káàbọ̀ padà sílùú Nàìjíríà lẹ́yìn tẹ́ ti lọ lásìkò díẹ̀ lọ́dọ̀ àwọn ọmọ yín gbogbo àwọn ọmọ yín náà pátá wọn ò ní fojú sunkún kankan nínú wọn lọ́fẹ̀ẹ́ láì rán mi mo fẹ́ fi àsìkò yìí kàn sọ fún àwọn èèyàn gbogbo ẹ̀yin tẹ́ wà ní Ìjẹ̀bú Òru àbí tẹ́ wà nílùú Ìjẹ̀bú àbẹ́yìn tẹ́ wà lógùn state àbẹ́yìn tó jẹ́ pé ẹ láǹfààní láti wá sógùn state láti wá lu àsìkò díẹ̀ tẹ́ wá ń wálé ìtura wo ló dáa tẹ́ lè dúró sí èmi fojú ara mi délé ìtura kan lénìí ohun tí mo sì rí bẹ́ẹ̀ tán bá sọ pé 7-star hotel 7-star ni ilé ìtura yìí á máa jẹ́ Times Square Hotel ní Ìjẹ̀bú Òru Times Square Hotel Times Square Hotel kódà mi ì dèrú hòtẹ́ẹ̀lì bẹ́ẹ̀ mo ti lọ àìmọye káàkiri àgbáyé àìmọye 7-star hotel mo ti bá wọn wọ̀ rí àmọ́ tí mo rí ní Times Square Hotel yìí mi ì rírú ẹ̀rí láyé mi ibẹ̀ ni wọ́n gbà wá lálejò sí lónìí gbogbo ayé pátápátá ni wọ́n tẹ́ wa sí ìyá súnà Jẹ̀bú Òru mo kí yín pé káàbọ̀ o lágbára Ọlọ́run Elédùmarè Times Square Hotel kò máa ní díntẹ́ fi pàtàn wọn ò ní finú iléeṣẹ́ yẹn wọn ò ní fi gbin pákí lágbára Ọlọ́run ẹ jèrè àwọn ọmọ yín o ẹ̀yin náà wà pẹ́ẹ́pẹ́ẹ́pẹ́ ọjọ́ ìbí tó ń bọ̀ lọ́nà tẹ́ fẹ́ ṣe yìí ẹ ṣe àṣeyọrí lágbára Ọlọ́run tó àníṣe ọmọ gbàgede ìmọ̀ kékeré kan mà tún jáde ṣé ẹ mọ̀ pé téèyàn bá tọ́lọ́ ń bá ní kí ẹ̀yin èèyàn kẹ́ ẹ bá yàn gbéṣẹ́ èèyàn sókè kò sí tí ò lè yọ látàbẹ́ ní dáadáa iléeṣẹ́ gbàgede ìmọ̀ tàbí bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ a tún ti bí ọmọ kékeré kan ìyẹn ni pé channel kékeré kan tó ti dìde látara bàbá gbàgede ìmọ̀ orúkọ channel yìí a máa jẹ́ Yoruba Broadcasting Network mo fi ọwọ́ mi sọ̀yà wípé Yoruba Broadcasting Network ó jẹ́ channel kan tó ń ṣojú gbogbo ọmọ Yorùbá ọmọ gbogbo kóòtù òjíire ohun táwọn bẹ́ẹ̀sì lé lórí òun náà ni news tẹ́ bá fẹ́ gbọ́ news ajá àbalẹ̀, pé fẹ́ gbọ́ broadcasting news, pé a fẹ́ gbọ́ Yorùbá broadcasting news, ẹ lọ máa gbọ́ Yorùbá broadcasting network. Ẹ search fún. Mo wá fẹ́ fi àsìkò yìí rọ̀ gbogbo ẹ̀yin fans mi pátápátá, gbogbo ẹ̀yin tẹ́ nífẹ̀ẹ́ Gbàgede Ìmọ̀, ẹ lọ máa bá mi subscribe sí orí Yorùbá broadcasting network. Ẹ search fún Yorùbá broadcasting network YBN. Tẹ́ ẹ bá débẹ̀, àwọn tẹ́ ẹ bá wò ń bẹ̀ tí ò bá tẹ́ yín lọ́rùn, ẹ unsubscribe. Mo fi gbogbo ẹnu sọ bẹ́ẹ̀. Tó bá jẹ́ pé nípa news o, pàápàá jùlọ ẹ̀yin tẹ́ wà ń lo òyìnbó, gbogbo ẹ̀ náà kọ́ ní Gbàgede Ìmọ̀ máa gbé. Ṣùgbọ́n àwọn eléyìí wọ́n máa ń tọwọ́ bọ news kiri, gbogbo tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ káàkiri Nàìjíríà ní current affairs lẹ́ẹ̀ máa gbọ́. Wọ́n tún wá ní system kan, gbogbo tó bá ṣẹlẹ̀ ní gbogbo ọ̀sẹ̀ kan délẹ̀, tó bá dijọ́ Sátidé, wọ́n á tún wá kó gbogbo ẹ̀ pọ̀, wọ́n á tún wá fi fún wa ní full package. Ó wọ̀ tí ká subscribe, èmi gan ti subscribe sí. Kódà wọ́n interview mi ní ìjẹta, ẹ rí pàṣọ tí mo wọ̀ ṣe fídíò níjẹta, òun náà lẹ máa rí lọ́rùn mi nú ẹ̀. Mo ṣe interview mbẹ̀. Wọ́n béèrè lórí ọ̀rọ̀ Yorubanation, wọ́n béèrè lórí ọ̀rọ̀ Sunday Igboho, mo sì dá wọn lóhùn gbogbo béèrè tí wọ́n béèrè. Inú Ìbàdàn kan náà iná lájọ wà, ìlú Ìbàdàn Ọ̀yọ́ state kan náà iná ni àjọ wà, ibẹ̀ ni channel tí wọ́n náà wà. Mo wọ studio wọn, mo fọ́ sára pé channel kékeré tó ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ bẹ̀rẹ̀, nígbà tẹ́yìn náà bá wo fídíò wọn, ẹ rí the kind of quality. Kódà mo fẹ́ náà wà quality ju Gbàgede Ìmọ̀ lọ pàápàá níbi tí channel wọn yẹn dé. Wọ́n ṣe standardly, wọ́n sì ń sọ àwọn òròyìn yẹn ní sẹlẹ́nsẹ́ bó ṣe yẹ kẹ́dà gbọ́. Mo wá fọwọ́ sọ̀yà wípé gbogbo ẹ̀dá pátápátá ni màá rẹ́kọ́mẹ́ndì Yorùbá broadcasting network fún. Ẹ jẹ́ ká lọ subscribe sí channel yẹn. Ohun tó máa dùn mọ́ mi jù ó ní kí n gbọ́ pé bàbá Gbàgede Ìmọ̀, àwọn èèyàn yín látọ̀dọ̀ yín o, mo rí 10,000 tó wá subscribe fún wa o. Nínú bàbá Gbàgede Ìmọ̀ channel lásán 16,000 ni wá. Tí n bá rí just 10,000 nù yín tẹ́ ẹ bá mi lọ subscribe síbẹ̀, kí lẹ rò pé fẹ́ ṣẹlẹ̀? Ọmọ Gbàgede Ìmọ̀ ní channel yẹn ló ṣe wù mí kájọ kọ́mọ lùbọ́. Bẹ́ẹ̀ bá ṣe ń subscribe báyìí sórí sí bàbá Gbàgede Ìmọ̀, bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ni kẹ́ máa bá mi subscribe sórí Yorùbá network broadcasting network YBN. Tó oníyanṣẹ́ ọlọ́kàṣe o, gbogbo ẹ̀yin tí ẹ bá mi fìfẹ́ jẹ tèmi, gbogbo yín náà ni mo kí. Ẹ má gbàgbé ẹ̀yin tẹ́ ẹ kàn wá tẹ́ ń lọ, tẹ́ ń wá tẹ́ ń wo fídíò wa tẹ́ ń lọ, ẹ ṣe subscribe sórí channel yìí, kí yẹn jẹ́ ẹ̀san kan ṣoṣo tẹ́ ẹ lè san mí. Bákan náà ni pé ọmọkùnrin tí ẹ̀ ń dáwó fún, mo fẹ́ fàsìkò yìí kí gbogbo ẹni tó ń bá mi dáwó fún o. Mi ò tí get address yẹn náà o. In fact, lè ní ní first time tí mo lè sọ pé mo jáde síta káàkiri. Ara ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ mókun báyìí, mo jáde síta lénìí. Mo lọ sí Ìjẹ̀bú Òru. Mo lọ kí ìkànnú àwọn ìyá mi tán ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ dé. Wọ́n lọ sálámọ̀ sáwọn ọmọ wọn láti bí oṣù 8 sẹ́yìn. Wọ́n ti padà dé láti Ìjẹ̀bú Òru. Alájà ìyá Súnà Ìjẹ̀bú Òru. Mo lọ ọ̀dọ̀ wọn ní bá sọ pé mo kọ́ jáde lọ. Lágbára Ọlọ́run ọba máa gbìyànjú láti get address àti gbogbo tá a máa get. Àti ẹ̀dẹ̀ tó ti wá conclude wípé kódà àwọn èèyàn ti ń sanwó sákàǹtì yẹn, ìyẹn àkáǹtì Universal Empowerment Fund NGO tí mo dá sílẹ̀. A ti conclude pé kákúkú sponsor máyì láti inú NGO mi. La ṣe sọ pé n tó ní kálukú bá ní tó bá fẹ́ fi ránṣẹ́ sí ọkùnrin yìí, ẹ fi ránṣẹ́ sí inú NGO. Mi rò pé ó yẹ kí n máa gbé fídíò yẹn ní gbogbogbà. Ẹ̀yin tí ẹ bá mọ kí là ń sọ, arákùnrin kan òun lèèyàn kú fún ní ọ̀nà tí ó jẹ́ kó bani nínú jẹ́. Wọ́n sì kó gbogbo ọmọ èèyàn ẹ̀ tó kú yìí, gbogbo ọmọ àbúrò ẹ̀ tó kú, wọ́n kó sí ọ̀dọ̀ ẹ̀ kóun ni kó máa bá tọ́jú ẹ̀. Arákùnrin yìí onímọ́tò pa àbúrò rẹ̀ ní ìlú Ìbàdàn ló ti ṣẹlẹ̀ ní Lucas. Wọ́n sì kó àwọn ọmọ àbúrò ẹ̀ yìí, wọ́n kó wá sọ́dọ̀ rẹ̀ wípé kóun ni kó máa tọ́jú ẹ̀. Arákùnrin wa sunkún sí ọmọ Nàìjíríà pé gbà wọn o, kò sí bóun ṣe lè tọ́jú ọmọ yìí àtìyàwó àtọmọ, kódà ìyàwó rẹ̀ wà nínú oyún. La fi bẹ̀ ẹ̀yin ọmọ Nàìjíríà wípé ntẹ́ ẹ bá ní, ẹ bá wa send ẹ̀ sí àkáǹtì UF Universal Empowerment Fund. Ká gbé kínní through NGO a fẹ́ sponsor àwọn ọmọ yìí ni wọ́n ní ká má jẹ́ káwọn ọmọ yẹn wà lọ́tọ̀ọ̀tọ̀ wọ́n ní ká kó wọn papọ̀ sójú kan kó jọ́dọ̀ ìyá wọn náà máa wà ká fún ìyá ẹ̀ tó lóyún ká fún ní owó kó máa fi tọ́jú ara ẹ̀ bákan náà ni pé àwọn ọmọ náà ká máa sponsor wọn through Universal Empowerment Fund nítorí kálukú bá wá ní ẹ fi ránṣẹ́ sí àkáǹtì yìí àkáǹtì náà nìyí First Bank ní First Bank orúkọ tó wà lórí ẹ̀ ní UF Universal Empowerment Fund Universal Empowerment Fund account number tẹ́ lò tẹ́ sanwó náà sí ní 20 35 40 64 72 25 lẹ́ẹ̀kan sí 20 35 64 72 25 orúkọ mi kan ló wà lórí ẹ̀ o signatory mẹ́fà dẹ̀ ló wà ńbẹ̀ èèyàn kan ò lè kówó yẹn náà lágbára ọlọ́ngbà tá a bá wọ ọkùnrin lọ tá a lọ present àwọn tá a bá fẹ́ ṣe oníyanṣẹ́ ọlọ́kàṣe gbogbo ẹ̀yin tẹ́ bá wa wètò bàbá gbàgede tòní gbogbo yín náà la dúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ ẹ̀ ṣé mo kú máa ń ṣe ládùúà ní gbogbo ìgbà pé ojú tẹ́ fi ń wò mí ò ní fọ́ etí tẹ́ sì fi ń gbọ́ mi ò ní dì ẹ jẹ́ ká tún pàdé nígbà míì nígbà tá a tún pàdé lórí ètò bàbá gbàgede mọ̀ gbogbo ẹ̀yin tẹ́ ń kí mi kú oríire stúdíò tuntun gbogbo yín náà mo dúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ ẹ̀ o àwa náà kàn ní pé kákan wò pé ṣé lè tó dáa mo sì rí pé ẹ̀yin èèyàn nífẹ̀ẹ́ sí ẹ ṣeun mo dúpẹ́ o ẹ jẹ́ ká tún pàdé nígbà míì títí tàtún wá fi pàdé ire o kàǹkà.